This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from craft and furniture to architecture and graphics. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, who is the grand dame of Danish design? That's a question we answer at a new exhibition in Copenhagen. We also learn why 1951 was a key year in architectural acoustics, plus we visit the oldest paint manufacturer in Britain. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's program. We begin the episode in Copenhagen, where an exhibition highlights the work of the late Danish furniture designer Nanna Ditzel. The creative moved to London during the 1960s, where her bold use of colours and fascination with more laid-back furniture chimed with the zeitgeist. It's a life that's documented in a new show called Nanna Ditzel, Breaking Free, which is on show at the Danish Architecture Centre. Monocle's Copenhagen correspondent, Michael Booth, went along to the exhibition and met Pernille Stockmann, its senior curator. Pernille began by sharing how Ditzel continues to inspire.
She's regarded actually as the grand dame of Danish design. She took the very best from the Danish design tradition, the focus on quality and putting the human being into the center. But beyond that, she looked out into the international scene and was very inspired by the new materials and how people were socializing. And she actually saw that there was a need to transform the way we were, being together, the way we were sitting, and how, for example, how can we have good and very deep conversations in another way. So she broke somehow also with the traditions, which is very inspiring.
And actually in front of us we have one of her designs, which was originally for children, right? It looks like a kind of cotton reel.
This is actually her version of, you could say, a stool for kids. It's called trisse in Danish, and toadstool, you would say. This is a multifunctional pieces of, you can say it's an object more than it's actually a furniture, because you can roll it, you can stand on it, you can sit on it, you can build with it.
When was this designed?
In 62.
And was that was like the beginning of her heyday, which is that, so her husband, she collaborated with her husband for the first years as a designer in the 50s, as I understand it. But then he died, didn't he, in 61 or something?
Yeah, he died there. And what actually happened when he passed away was that she didn't give up, and that's a very fantastic story, I think, also with the eyes of today, and became very successful in the 60s, where she also later in the 60s met her new husband, Kurt Heide, which was a businessman.
And he was based in London. He was Danish,
but London, yeah. She moved to London in the swinging 60s in London. They established what is called Interspace, which was not only a studio for Nanna Ditzel, but was a showroom for manufacturers and producers, and it became a melting pot, you should say, or meeting point for very innovative, radical thinking, architects, designer,
Where was it?
It was in Hampstead in London. Yeah, in an old factory. And what is fascinating about it, that the whole room, which Nanna created with her own design mainly, was an experience in itself. And that is also what we show in the exhibition here, a little glimpse of.
Tell us a bit more about the exhibition. Why now, and what will visitors get to see?
What she actually did back in her days. And she just, we just celebrate her 100th anniversary for her birth last year, is that she's so relevant today. Not because you can say one-to-one, what she did back then, we should do today, but the way she was challenging the norms, the conventions, and was actually reading her time and tried to create design which broke with the tradition in order to create better environment and spaces that fulfill the needs of today. So she looked all her life into colors, for example, and which impact it could have on a room and how you could create a new environment, just changing or adopting colors. So the sensory feeling was important for her. Also on the body, for example, with her jewelries, where you can see the light she uses as a playfulness in her Trinidad chair.
That was a plywood wooden chair, quite cheap, mass market.
Mass market, and one of become, you can say, a modern classic today, actually, because of its very organic form, inspired by the architecture from Trinidad.
I've spoken in the past to the people at Fredericia, which was one of the companies she worked with very much, and they described when they were making that chair, as I understand it, the people in the factory said this isn't possible to do, but she had such a force of personality that she insisted they keep trying, and actually they discovered new techniques through making that. And other people I've spoken to who knew Nanna Ditzel, they talk about this amazing force of nature. She was almost like a wise woman, a guru to a lot of people.
Yeah, she should have this extremely charisma. She has a very strong personality. She was taking a room when she entered it, and I think people were very looking up to her because she was such an inspiring woman of her time.
Again, talking about the Danish pantheon, the colour palette tends to be quite natural and quite reserved. But when I think of Nanna Ditzel, with the toadstool in front of us here is like EasyJet orange. She was really super colourful, and she worked a lot with Werner Panton, who's also known for that really bold, almost neon colour palette. How did the Danes react to that? I guess it worked really well in 60s London.
Well, I think actually, it's a very good question, because I think, the Danish people was, of course, very, keen of the tradition, but somehow a lot of her design went into the homes. It was also in the kind of element. You can have the stool here as the trisse, or you can have the chair, and a lot of her environments where she's very pushing the boundaries. For example, for kids in libraries and stuff like that, their colors was welcomed. So for that reason, and even though she was very sparkling, she adjusted the colors. For example, to the DSB trains where she created the interiors. She was very aware of what kind of colors should be where.
So at the moment you're preparing the exhibition. It's going to open in a few days' time on the 23rd of January. And we have this orange toadstool in front of us, and I can see some more colour popping in the workshop next door. Can we just go next door and have a look at what you're up to in there with other exhibits? Well, this is an amazing colour, isn't it? How would you describe it?
This is what I will call Ditzel orange red. It's a fabric from Quadrat. It's orange in one way, sparkling orange, but on the same time it's like toned in a way that you can look at it for hours.
Yeah, it's not neon, is it? It's quite restful to the eyes.
It's restful somehow, but I think it's also because of the texture of the textile, which adds a lot of posture to the way you look at it and you feel it.
What would this have been used for in its day?
In the exhibition, or back then when it was?
Back then when it was designed. Was it designed for something specific?
I think the Halliday fabric was designed as a furniture fabric to be used for different kind of furniture, especially Ditzel's own. She created, she lit these stairscapes, which she's very famous for, and for using the stairscapes in her design, you needed other kind of furnitures, and these furnitures should be, very comforting and soft and flexible.
What do you think her influence could be? What's the potential? Why is she needed now?
I hope that it's not mainly only her iconic pieces of furniture, which we will be reminded of, but her extremely large contribution to the idea of how a space can be used and how we can transform them and adapt them to the needs we have in our time.
For Monocle in Copenhagen, I'm Michael Booth.
For a celebration of all things print, tune in to The Stack, featuring expert analysis, the view of magazine veterans, and a look at what's flying off newsstands around the world.
This is very unique, to be able to buy a magazine and to find that many doors which you can open and that lead you into very different worlds.
Listen to The Stack and hear Fernando Augusto Pacheco in conversation with our favorite editors. The Stack airs every Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Make it part of your must-listen lineup, live or on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm joined now in the studio by Maylee Evans, this show's producer, and that's because Maylee has gone out into the world and found something to fascinate her.
I've made an episode on clay. Let's move on to acoustics.
Is this your next big thing, acoustics?
Well, it's maybe the flavour of the week. So
Okay, no, I like this. I'm happy with the flavour. That's perfect. Tell us a little bit about it, this obsession with acoustics.
Maybe perhaps unsurprisingly, thanks to working in radio, sound and the role of acoustics when it comes to architecture is something that I find fascinating. And so when I found out that a book had recently been released that kind of delves into a very key period for these investigations, I simply had to find out more and speak to its author. As
in studies of acoustics, because you're currently, I can see you on the other side of the glass brandishing. I was going to say waving, but brandishing suits the title. You're brandishing a book called Pistols in St. Paul's, Science, Music and Architecture in the 20th Century. Who's behind this tome?
Fiona Smith is the author and who we're going to hear from shortly. And she is an assistant professor in architectural history, looking specifically at the development of acoustics within architecture and science in the 20th century. So this is very much geared around a particular period of time. And I think it offers a snapshot of maybe something that might seem quite commonplace today.
I think it's one of those kind of intangible things that is present in every space. It's kind of like light. It's something that's always going to be having some sort of impact on us, because no matter, if we're moving through a space as inhabitants of it with our footsteps, or if there are people or animals or trees or wind or weather on the outside also impacting on that.
Something actually Fiona brought up was how, as a visiting lecturer, knowing that her voice was not particularly one that would project easily, one thing she would do is wear a pair of shoes that had a particular kind of clicking sound. And so she could register what kind of acoustic that venue was giving her and then sort of adapt the way she would project her voice to match that. So it's something you can take cues from and adapt yourself, I suppose. It's something I thought was quite intriguing too. I like that she was her own walking case study, which I think is lovely. So let's hear from Fiona Smith now.
1951 was a really public and prominent year for acoustics. Often the landmark years for science are the year of a breakthrough in the lab, or the year of a Nobel Prize, or maybe even the year of a scientific publication, but 1951 was a landmark year for other reasons. It was a year of public experiment and showcasing acoustics. So really I think you could say it was a year that acoustics was heard. In 1951 at St. Paul's, there was a demonstration in the cathedral after evensong of how the cathedral responded. A pistol was fired from the pulpit, and the effect on the acoustics was measured. And the idea, I suppose it was twofold. One, it was to map out how the building responded to acoustics and how speech reinforcement systems could be put in place to work with that particular acoustics, but it was also to demonstrate to the public where the science was at, what was being done, and to do it very prominently. And it doesn't really get more prominent than the pulpit in St. Paul's at Christmas. The building's response to, I suppose, it's an impulsive signal. It's a fairly straightforward impulse, but the building responds very musically. And it did, in a sense, give that idea that a building responds in a particular way. Different buildings have signature sounds, and St. Paul's has a very, very long reverberation time. It's about 12 seconds. So it also gave an indication of how long sound lasts within the context of St. Paul's. There had been an awful lot of experimental work in how you could design for musical tone within buildings before that, and how you could see a building as a musical instrument. But in this instance, it really showcased that idea, and it did it very publicly.
And what were some of the other experiments happening, the other buildings that were being investigated in this way?
In 1951, the two most prominent buildings were St. Paul's and Festival Hall. There was a legacy of other buildings that was reflected in the work at both St. Paul's and at Festival Hall. The first was Westminster Cathedral when it was still under construction. Westminster Cathedral, there were a series of musical experiments while the building was still under construction. It hadn't been consecrated, it wasn't yet open to the public, but there were a series of tuning concerts in 1901 and into 1902 with choirs of different sizes located at different points within the cathedrals, teasing out and probing how that space responded to different styles of music and to different locations of music. So that was an early one in the 1900s. After that, I suppose the next most significant set of experiments on musical tone was in a disused munitions factory in the early 1920s. In those experiments, a really reverberant space was requisitioned within this disused munitions factory. Ideal tonal conditions were identified based on existing concert halls: Covent Garden, Steinway Hall, and Queen's Hall, all in London. And the experimental work at the munitions factory was to try and recreate conditions that gave a similar sense of tonality to each of those 3 concert halls and see if they could be quantified, to see if there was a way of putting numbers on experience and also of describing tonality in concert halls. It was as much a building of vocabulary as it was about ascertaining numbers. This was a way of informing design criteria, different parameters in acoustics, because it's very difficult to say what's good or what's bad. It's very subjective. At that point, there was just one quantifiable parameter for assessing acoustics, and that was reverberation time, which is a measure of how long a given sound lasts in a space. But the experimental work on musical tone began to look at reverberation time at different frequencies and compare the effect of different frequencies. So it brought a much more musical component to the idea of measuring a building's performance. With each concert hall and each test, there were additional learnings that were added to the mix. The next most iconic one, I think, was probably the Albert Hall during World War II. When the proms moved there, the Albert Hall has a much longer reverberation time, it's a much bigger space, very, very different acoustic context, and it wasn't necessarily suitable for orchestral music. A request for an emergency acoustic consultation was put forward, and the idea of that was to tune a space within the Albert Hall to make it more suitable for orchestral music. An installation was put in place, and after each concert it was adapted based on what was determined to be problematic in the acoustics. So it was very much tuning by ear. Tuning a building incrementally, working with what's there and adapting it to music.
What does tuning a building look like, or what would, I guess, someone visiting see or maybe not see happening behind the scenes to help a space perform better?
It's not necessarily a very visible process. It's changing configurations and changing materials, but an awful lot of it depends on what's heard. One of the really interesting things about 1951 was it was a year when the idea of expertise in acoustics really expanded. The idea of who is an expert listener. We often think of experts as being scientists trained in the discipline, or people who are very, very specifically trained, but by the time of the tuning concerts in Festival Hall, the idea of who was an expert had expanded tremendously. And the expert opinions that were taken on board were members of the public, people who use the building, musicians, critics, architecture critics, music critics, and scientists. So it was this hugely broad array of expertise that was brought on board. And I think that's one of the really, really interesting things about the tuning concerts by the time 1951 happened, was that they were much more inclusive and much more open to who is an expert.
What is the legacy today of these acoustic experiments?
I think it's become much more quantifiable now. So much of what was happening then was tuning by ear, working by ear. And there was just, as I said, there was just that one parameter, reverberation time, for measuring acoustics. And now we have a whole suite of parameters that measure things like clarity. And there are different parameters for clarity for speech than for clarity in music. And we also measure envelopment, and we measure the difference heard between left and right ears. At our fingertips, we have an awful lot more by way of measuring equipment, by way of mathematics, and by way of analysing the data. But I suppose that idea early on was that it was about what happens between the numbers. And I think we still look at it in that way as well. We don't really look at one parameter in isolation, we look at all of them together. I think the analogy of a building as a musical instrument is probably one of the best ways to explain architectural acoustics. It's how a space responds to sound, how it creates and shapes sound, whether that's for clarity or for envelopment, whether it's suited to particular styles of music, whether you can hear yourself, whether you can hear conversation, or whether you're overwhelmed as well. So it's all of these things all rolled into one.
That was Fiona Smith there, and Pistols in St Paul's, Science, Music and Architecture in the 20th Century is published by Manchester University Press. Now, Nick, you are quite well travelled, and I wondered if there were any venues or sites that you visited recently where the acoustics were top-notch. I mean, I'm going to be honest, it's probably not something I give a heap of thought to, but it's certainly on my radar. I think good acoustics is kind of like comfortable room temperature, or like an easy conversation taking place, if we want to extend the metaphor. To me, it's almost like you shouldn't even notice it. It's almost, if you will, background noise, something that's kind of just taking place. So I notice when there are bad acoustics, that's the thing. So I could probably point out a few restaurants that I've been to lately where you can barely have a conversation above the hubbub of it all. When I think of acoustic experiences, and it's actually quite pertinent that obviously this book is called Pistols in St Paul's, because one of the best acoustic experiences I actually had at the same time as you, but we're on different sides of St Paul's for a presentation at London Design Festival maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where an artist installed this great big chime in the centre of St Paul's. And it was just one of those moments where, look, it's a gorgeous space, obviously, I'm not denying that, but where, good music and good acoustics, the way the sound kind of travelled and buffeted around this huge cathedral and enveloped you despite its size, was truly the thing that was most remarkable about the space. That is the thing that jumped immediately off the top of my head. So I can do bad restaurants and I can do St Paul's Cathedral, and there's no in between for me. We'll be right back after this.
The Entrepreneurs is Monocle's 30-minute weekly conversation with inspiring company founders, uncovering the secrets of growing a great business and discussing the many pathways and definitions of success.
I think in your standard entrepreneurial journey, there's a lot of times when you might want to throw in the towel. But if impact is really at the heart of what you do, you don't have that option. You have to stick to your guns.
We're craving curation in a very different way and have understood how small businesses have given complete life to our streets and communities. And I think we'll value them in a completely different way, which I'm excited about.
Tune in every Wednesday at 2000 hours London time for a new episode of The Entrepreneurs, right here on Monocle Radio.
Finally on today's show, have you ever wondered where movies get that unique green shade for special effects backgrounds? Or where galleries and London's West End plays source vibrant and colourful hues for their set designs? Mylands Paints is a British luxury paint manufacturer whose products have been used on the likes of Harry Potter and Downton Abbey. Monocle's Lucrezia Motta visited the factory in the London borough of Lambeth to meet its managing director, Dominic Myland.
We are the oldest family paint and wood finish manufacturer in the UK. And I'm the 4th generation. My son's working in the business, so he's the 5th generation. We've been in London all our history, and in the borough of Lambeth. We're now in South Lambeth, but so we haven't moved far in 140 years. My great-grandfather, who started the business in 1884, he was originally a polisher. All furniture was French polished back in those times, hand finished, before furniture was sprayed. So he started as a polisher, and then he opened a business doing sort of rags and polishes to the furniture industry, and then started manufacturing paints at the same time. So we had decorative paints and wood finishes, which is pretty much what we've got today, although technology's moved on, but not for every product. There are traditional products which stay the same. He was also a house builder as well, so he sort of thought, that you really want to use the best quality raw materials possible, keep the quality high, and stay in that niche segment, which we've always done. So we're considered today as a premium paint manufacturer.
Dominic's grandfather was the first one in his family to get into making paint for the entertainment industry, which has now become the brand's trademark. From TV show sets like Downton Abbey to art institutions like the Dulwich Picture Gallery, Mylands has become a key player when it comes to bringing a space to life through colour.
So some are more blue, some are redder. So you kind of with black blue, you get a blue undertone or a red undertone. So
we're now sort of 94 years into manufacturing paints for film and TV alone. Over the years, the industry's got bigger. You know, I mean, the Harry Potter thing was the big sort of game changer in the UK, and since then the industry has been good, apart from the screenwriters' strike that happened a couple of years ago. But generally, the industry's in a strong position.
Touring the different production zones of the factory offers a glimpse into the long process of transforming paint, from pigment to can.
We manufacture everything on site. There are basically 4 buildings. One is decorative paints, one is labs and raw materials, one is solvent-based paints, more traditional finishes like waxes, wood finishes, and this building is the warehouse, where we've got like 400 bays where we store brushes through to finished product, thousands of sample pots that we keep for the paints up on the mezzanine, and then we do our picking and packing in this area here. This is one of the rooms where we do custom colour matching. So we'll work with pieces of fabric, cloth, anything, traditional paint colours, and we can mix them, blend them into our formula. Because a lot of people like our crushed marble formulation, the marble matte, because it has a unique finish to it, unlike other paints. So this building is the main water-based paints department. This is the busiest part of the factory. We've got these 4 mixers here, and they're 3,000 litre mixers, so you can make, when we're busy, we can make a reasonable quantity of paint. Then we make smaller batches from scratch.
Specialist products for the film industry are made in the same room as the more traditional oil and flat spirit-based paints.
Yeah, but fundamentally what they're looking for is dead flat finishes to start off with. So they want to start with a dead flat base. We use a lot of natural earth pigments in these paints. In fact, all of the ones for the film industry we make, if they're an earth tone colour, we make them with natural earth pigments. And that gives it a raw sort of feel to it and depth of colour, which is what they're looking for. And then if they want to make it shiny, they'll add different layers of gloss varnishes on top, to give that
extra,
that structure, aging or, whatever they want as the end result. And we use a lot of things like china clay, calcium carbonate, which are all, natural products originally, talc, crushed marble, which goes into the marble matte paint. And then we store all our pigments here as well. So these are the earth pigments: yellow ochre, burnt umber, raw sienna. There's a blue there we do a lot of blue screen for the film industry, for CGI. One of the things that we've done with our hero products, which is our marble matte emulsion, we've used crushed Carrara marble into the paint, and it's got some benefits to it which other paints don't have.
As well as paints, Mylands also produces wax polishes, another unique trait that sets them apart from other manufacturers.
In this room here, we still manufacture wax polishes using a heated process. So we put the wax in these oil-jacketed tanks, warm them up, add the colour, test them, and then fill them out. We still use a lot of natural beeswax, which is made in the UK still.
So this is very much all made in the UK.
This room here, we make our traditional finishes, shellacs and wood stains. This is a stain blending area where we still do a lot of bulk wood stains for the flooring industry, where people want to use, want to stain a floor, which is quite a specialisation.
Being the last London-based paint manufacturer makes her a heavy title, but the Mylands family shows that an emphasis on quality and sustainability are key to a long and colourful company life.
As a small manufacturer, you have to be different.
From Monocle in London, I'm Lucrezia Motta.
And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans, with assistance from Alan Whedon. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.